Hi, my name is Irena Swanson and I want to show you how to make these 20 blocks of half square triangles very fast and accurately using my method that I call tube piecing. I have a web page dedicated to the method. Visit www.tubepiecing.com. First, I give an outline of what we're doing. We start with strips because tube piecing is an enhancement of strip piecing. And then we sew the strips into wide tubes. The wide tubes get cut down into narrow tubes, and the narrow tubes get sewn together into a secondary wide tube, and the secondary wide tubes get cut apart into rows of these half square triangles, and then the rows get sewn together into the blocks. Alright, so let's get started. To get these finished size squares of 2 inches on the side, you start with 16 dark and 16 light strips, all cut at strip width 2 plus 9/32 of an inch. Yes, that's an unusual number. It's 2 inches plus 1/4 of an inch plus 1/32 of an inch. Eyeball that 32nd between the notches. Then these 32 strips get sewn together 16 at a time, alternating lights and darks, and at an offset, so that when they're sewn, they form approximately a 45-degree angle. What you probably cannot see are pencil marks on the sides indicating, so this mark indicates where to position the top of the strip when sewing these two together. Okay. So take 8 darks, 8 lights, sew them together into one construction, and the remaining 8 darks and 8 lights into another construction. Here is an example of such a construction, already sewn, pressed, and trimmed off at precisely 45 degrees. Here, this is a 45-degree angle. Make sure, take the time to make sure that all of these angles here are 45-degree angles. And next, the 2 outside strips have to be sewn together. And unlike all other strips, this one has all other seams. This one has to be done precisely. And I already have a sample worked out. Here are the 2 outside strips being sewn together. The seam is at 1/4 of an inch allowance from the edge, and it starts precisely where the 2 strips start. The strips are straight, so the seam is straight, but note that there is twisting. And when you release this twist, look, you get a tube. This is a primary wide tube, since it's the first tube that appears here, and it's fairly wide this way. You press the latest seam, you turn it inside out, and here is a version. And now this primary wide tube gets cut into primary narrow tubes at tube width 2.5 inches. Make sure that the cut is perpendicular to the folds of the tube and at 45 degrees to all the angles. You may want to do some careful measurement. I'm just cutting. Here is a primary narrow tube. Okay. From each tube, you will get about 10 of these primary narrow tubes, possibly 11. And because you're making 2 primary wide tubes, you will get 20 of these primary narrow tubes. Here's a primary narrow tube from the same primary wide tube. And let's see, so you can see that they're the same. But to sew them together, you want to rotate one this way or maybe that way, because you do not want like fabrics to be too close to each other. But what you will do is you will sew dark to light, light to dark, and it's very easy. No pinning is necessary. Just flip over, and you make sure that where the bottom seam comes up, it meets the top seam precisely at the edges. So you sew a little bit, stop to adjust the next meeting of seam to seam at the edges and the next seam to seam at the edges. You go all the way around, and because the tube is so wide, it's really no harder than sewing a flat piece of fabric. Here are 4 primary narrow tubes already sewn together and pressed. And because we did the matching at edges, there is now a planned gap on the right side. So these vertices do not come together. So what we do next is we cut across through all of these gaps and we get the rows. You should be able to see one of these rows like this. The first cut across the tube should probably be done with scissors, but I have a cutout mat that I can slip inside and put the ruler. Make sure we go exactly through the halfway through the gaps, but perpendicular to all the seams, between narrow tubes. You make a cut, and now we have a rectangle. And from this rectangle, it's easy to achieve further such cuts. So this should be 2.5 inches. Go through the gaps, maybe do some tugging, and voila, we get a row. Here I have a part of a secondary wide tube being cut apart. Note that in alternate rows, the dark triangles are pointing up and the others are pointing down. So you want to rotate half of these cut rows until all the triangles are pointing up. All the dark triangles are pointing up. And then you sew 4 at a time into blocks, and here are 20 blocks like this, already sewn together and pressed. And then just to finish, you could of course also have other possible color schemes made in the same way.